Hello Year 7 and welcome back to Lesson 3 of History in Term 3 at Maidenhill. Today's title is Was the Black Death a Blessing in Disguise? So we're continuing our look at medieval life with a focus on the Black Death of 1348, an event which changed England arguably for many centuries afterwards. Please take a moment to pause the video and write the title now. Thank you. Okay, now you've written the title, I would like you to answer these questions that are on the screen in full sentences, in as much detail as you can. If you're not sure, you can skip one. Take about 5 minutes, pause the video and answer these 4 questions. When did the Black Death first hit England? So we're looking for a year then. What was the cause of the Black Death? Or the believed cause of the Black Death? Describe 2 beliefs about the cause of the Black Death. So what did people think at the time caused the Black Death? And describe 2 ways people tried to prevent the Black Death. So pause the video, take 5 minutes and answer those questions now, answering in full sentences where you need to. Okay, so you should by now hopefully have attempted to answer those questions. Use a green pen now to add to or correct those answers that you have. So here we have the 4 questions. Take a green pen and add to or correct your answers. You might need to rewrite the question or write your answer in a full sentence. So when did the Black Death first hit England? Well, that was 1348. Moving over from the Gobi Desert in Asia and then through into Europe through trade routes and finally hitting England in 1348. What was the cause of the Black Death? Well, it was spread, we think, through infected fleas and then once it became pneumonic plague through contagious people. What did people believe caused the Black Death? Well, largely we can summarise that by saying superstition and belief. For example, movement of the planets or punishment of God. This was a time of very much a religious period of English history and when superstition and belief drove the actions of most people. Based on that, how did people try to prevent the Black Death? Perhaps you wrote something like praying or punishing themselves, flagellation. There were folk cures, including rubbing a frog on boils. Some places attempted quarantine and cleaning of streets. Pause the video now, take 5 minutes, and using a green pen, add to or correct the answers that you have based on what you can see on the screen. Thank you. Okay, hopefully you have by now added to or corrected your answers. If you haven't, make sure you pause the video and do so before moving on to the next stage. So our question today is, was the Black Death a blessing in disguise? Now, the Black Death was undoubtedly a terrible and traumatic event. It killed at least 1 in 3 of the population. Maybe even more, maybe up to half of the population, which was about, at the time would have been around 2 million people in England may have died from the Black Death. It did not just affect poor people, but all sections of society, and saw a mass loss of life. It caused huge changes, which led to violent uprising. How could any of this be possibly positive? I just want you to think for a moment. Look back at the feudal system diagram here that we looked at earlier in the year. How do you think anything such as this event could be taken to be positive? think particularly about how it might affect the peasants. So if we look at our feudal system, we see here we've got the mass of peasants at the bottom, we've got the knights, we've got the lords, and we've got the king. In terms of the effects of the Black Death, it was the peasants who achieved, in the end, more positive impacts. The Black Death meant that peasants were now in a more powerful position. They could demand pay for their work and choose who they worked for. Because there were lots of vacancies in jobs, it meant they could move around much more. It meant that they weren't tied to the land that they had been before, because lords needed them to work their land, because so much of the population had died. Some could say to their landlord that they, instead of paying rent in food, they would pay rent in cash. This provides them much more freedom, and they could also perhaps negotiate how much they paid. On the negative side, for landowners, they were very angry about this. Feudalism, the feudal system, had worked well since the Norman conquest. It put them in a very powerful position, in control of large parts of society. As it began to break down, they got worried and didn't want it to change. So the Black Death, whilst an absolutely terrible event, did, for some people, have long-term positive impacts. It enabled freedom for the peasants. It enabled them to enabled them to move away, perhaps from the land in which they had previously worked. It gave them more opportunity to exploit the vacancies that were created. I'd like you to pause the video now and to write down these 4 points here. That will take you about 5 to 10 minutes. Okay. If you haven't finished writing those down, please make sure you pause the video and do so before moving on to the next task. What we're going to do now is have a list of information about a made-up peasant called Adam, and we're going to find out what effects the Black Death had on him. To do that, there is an information sheet attached to show my homework. We're going to read through it together now. So here's Adam. Before the Black Death, Adam had a small piece of unproductive land and had to work for nothing on his lord's land as rent. So he paid his lord in work to work on that land and perhaps some food. After the Black Death, there were fewer labourers, fewer workers. Adam demands wages for his work, or he will go and work for another lord. His lord starts paying Adam a wage. He starts being paid a wage in the form of cash. Adam can now afford to marry and start a family. There are many good farms lying empty after the Black Death, so Adam is able to negotiate an affordable rent to move into one. Adam is earning higher wages, which allows him to afford better food for his family. So you can see how the Black Death has had an overall positive effect on Adam. As there are fewer labourers, he can demand a wage, he can afford to start a family, he can now move on to a new farm, he can feed his family better, and therefore he can increase his wealth over time. So it's a good case, it's a good example of how this terrible event could have long-term positive effects. Using that information sheet, I would like you to write a PEE paragraph describing what has changed to make Adam happy. So remember, you need to PE properly in history, which means you should make a point, you need to give me some evidence, and you need to explain the evidence. Use the sentence starter here to start your paragraph, to write your paragraph. After the Black Death, a lot changed for Adam. For example, what changed for Adam? this meant that. How did that make his life better? I would like you to give me 2 or 3 examples in your paragraph, please. Go back to the information sheet, reread it if you need to, and then pause the video and start and write your paragraph. This will take approximately 10 minutes. Okay, pause the video, complete that task now. Okay, so moving on now to the next task. Make sure you completed this one before you move on. If things had changed positively for peasants, how had they changed for landowners? Let's think about these 3 changes. How would landowners feel about the things that happened for peasants? What impact would it have on landowners? What might they do to try and stop the changes? Pause the video and have a think about those 3 questions. Okay, to answer those questions, let's look again at our information sheet. For landowners, living in the shadow of the Black Death meant a few things. Firstly, peasants could now demand wages and pay their rent in cash. Landowners could no longer expect free labour, free work from peasants. They had to negotiate with peasants. As workers would obviously work for whoever paid the best wages. That's how it works in the world. You tend to work for the person who gives you the best conditions. Neighbouring landlords could raise wages and try to attack each other's workers. This meant people could move from farm to farm, depending on where they wanted to work. As there were fewer peasants around, due to the Black Death, landowners received less rent, so they're having to pay higher wages, but also they're receiving less rent. There were higher prices for some goods, for example wheat, as crops rotted in the fields due to lack of labour. Soon landlords began to demand that these changes had to stop. The king agreed, and the stage was set for a confrontation between the peasants and those above them in society. So you can see there was a profound effect also for landowners. Using that information, imagine you are a medieval landowner and write a letter to the king explaining what has happened and what you would like him to do. Use these sentence starters to help you do that. Pause the video now and complete that task. Okay. For our final task today, I would like you to draw 2 stick figures. One representing a peasant, one representing the lords, the landowners. Next to your stick figures or picture of those people, I would like you to complete a speech bubble for each group of people. What would the peasants think about the changes? Would they be largely happy? And why? What would the lords, the landowners, think about the changes? Perhaps they would think they were more negative. Why would they think that? So draw your stick figures or pictures of a peasant and a landlord or nobility, and then complete the speech bubbles as you can see here. Pause the video and complete that task now. Okay, well thank you very much. Please make sure you submit all your work online, either through Satchel 1 Show My Homework, or photograph it and email it through to my email address, or your teacher's email address. Right, thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.